Welcome, everybody, to this Christian Chronicle live Zoom that we're doing related to the George Floyd case in Minneapolis. I'm honored to have some wonderful Christian leaders, ministers, investigative reporter here today to talk about this case and kind of just see about some of the issues that we as Christians should be thinking about. I'm Bobby Ross, editor of the Christian Chronicle. For anybody watching this who's not familiar with me, we've got Hamil Harris, who's a minister in Maryland and former Washington Post reporter.
Hey, Bobby.
Hey, Hamil, thanks for joining us. I was just introducing the segment we're recording.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So you're here, and I guess we will maybe start off, and I think maybe before we'll start off with Dr. Russell Pointer from the Minneapolis Central Church of Christ, and then open it up to everybody else along the way. Kind of your first time to say something, maybe let people watching know who you are. But if we could start out with Dr. Pointer, maybe you tell us where you're coming from and kind of what has happened in Minneapolis this week, and kind of just update us on the situation and how you're looking at that as a minister there in the heart of that city right now.
Sure. Thank you, Brother Ross. I'm Dr. Russell A. Pointer. I'm the senior minister at the Minneapolis Central Church of Christ. As most of you know, that on May 28th, around sometime that evening, maybe about 4 or 5 o'clock, we're told that there was an incident that, of course, was a forgery in progress. And from my understanding, it escalated to more than that. As a city, as a person, I'm outraged. As a city, we're trying to grieve, and I think that the city is angry as well. Our members are in full support of the Floyd family, and first of all, I also want to give my condolences, and our prayers and our heart goes out to the Floyd family, because I saw their interview as they talked from Houston, and we want to be cognizant and aware of the fact that there's family members involved, that we certainly want to pray for them at this time as well. But back to the incident, we had 4 white or 4 police officers, should I say, that was able to had a person, as you know, Floyd was killed on their watch, and we saw life taken out of a person. And we're all asking now for a murder conviction. We're asking that the DA, Mike Freeman, step up and come forth with that. I'm very proud of our mayor. I'm very proud of our police chief, who I know them both personally, both vehemently and viscerally. They did an outstanding job at stepping up. And I know that we got to keep them in prayer, because I know that the union is going to come after our police chief, but I think he did the right thing. I know he did the right thing. I have no doubt in my mind that he did the right thing, and I'm very, very glad about that. I also want to bring out that this is troubling and problematic because it keeps happening over and over again. Our Black men, our Black boys are just keep being approached. I saw one the other day, where a guy was in front of his house loading, getting ready to go help the poor. And I don't know if y'all saw that. And he had medical supplies, and they pulled him over and handcuffed him. So it's getting over and over again. They have to do something with the fact, because being Black in America should not be a death sentence. And I think that we have to do something to make sure that this doesn't continue to keep going on. The main issue that I want to bring out, and I know I know some of you guys want to talk more about it. I'm just going to try to bring up the iceberg on it. I think that we also have to understand that this case is more than just civil rights. This case is about human rights as well. So it wasn't just that his civil rights was violated. His human right, his humanity, his dignity as a person. I don't understand how they could sit there and just dehumanize him and act like he's not even a person. And for you to to take life out of him, and y'all just stand there. He's screaming, yelling, saying he can't breathe, and you're not even trying to be conscious. If a person yells out for help, you should help them. You're a police officer. Put him in the car. Do something. You already had him handcuffed. There was no need to go ahead and breathe the life out of him. So I just want to say, and I know others are going to be talking about it, and I'll come back with some more points as well, but I just want to bring out the fact that as we go forward, as we talk about this, I just want to impress upon us the dynamic of the fact that we're not just talking about a civil right issue, but a human right issue, humanity. And that's something we really, really, really have to think about as we look at this particular case in particular. So I'll pause right now and let you guys talk a little bit, and I'll come back. I got more to say. I just don't want to take up all the time.
I appreciate it, Dr. Pointer. Any of the other brothers on the Zoom want to, I guess, weigh in or say kind of what's on your mind as you've seen the news about what happened this week in Minneapolis?
Well,
I would just like to echo Dr. Pointer in expressing our condolences and our sympathy to the family. I think it's very easy to get caught up in the emotion of it and feeling your own anger and outrage at the situation. But we have to be mindful that a family has been personally impacted by this, and very quickly a death can become politicized. But we have to remember this was the death of a human being, and his family is hurting right now. So our thoughts and prayers are certainly with him. And I also echo the sentiment about it being a human rights issue. And the striking thing about it to me really was the dehumanization of George Floyd. And on my Facebook yesterday, I posted a picture of the officer on his neck next to a picture of a poacher sort of sitting on top of a lion that had been killed. And to me, the striking thing was how similar that looked. This man just so cavalierly and brazenly, almost arrogantly and smugly just perched atop this man's neck for minutes, minute upon minute is just passing by. He's calling for help. There's no sympathy, there's no compassion. And it really struck me like a hunter or a poacher really just kind of lording over and gloating over his kill. I mean, this man looked really smug and almost self-satisfied. There was an arrogance and almost an untouchable air about him, even despite the fact that he knows he's being recorded. And that's what struck me so much, that the blatant arrogance and with impunity. I mean, this was just done with complete impunity. You're being recorded, and you don't even have enough decency or even enough basic thought for your own job. You would think that I'm being recorded, let me at least kind of ease up a little bit so I don't, get penalized or lose my job or something. Even if I don't care about the man, let me at least care about my own job. But there was so much entitlement, so much arrogance over it and in it that it was just a disgusting display, I think. And I think that's why it really makes it shocking. We've seen these things happening over and over again, but this really, really just hit hard, I think, for me personally and for a lot of other people on that level, just the dehumanization, blatant dehumanization of this man.
Roger, would you mind doing a quick intro of yourself before we move on to Brother Barry?
I apologize. Rigel Dawson. I'm the minister of the Family of Faith Church of Christ in Flint, Michigan.
Appreciate that.
Yes, I'm Sammy Berry. I'm the senior minister at the Dallas West Church of Christ in Dallas, Texas, and also serve as one of the elders. And of course, Dallas West is a congregation where both of them, John, attended before. He was actually attending with us during the period of time when he was taken from us. And gosh, there's so many emotions that go through my mind when I was viewing that video. And I want to also say that we're definitely praying for the family there, and want Dr. Pointer to know if there's anything that we can do here in Texas. If you need us to get on a plane or whatever, we're happy to come in and do that. But I think that we have an issue in our country in terms of our culture. There's a culture of fear. We are afraid of the black male, and then there's also an issue in police culture because I find it very hard to understand, you know, when you describe taking a life as a good shoot. And I know there wasn't a shooting here, but that's the mentality. And normally they talk about when there's a killing that they shot someone and it was a good shoot. Well, that's, again, dehumanizing. So I'm very troubled by it. And it appears to me that we've made almost no progress since the time of the shooting of Botham Jean. And I'll just stop right there.
Appreciate that. Brother Simpson, any thoughts at this point?
Yes, I appreciate you, Bobby, for inviting me to this call. I am Beat Chris, and I am ministering at the Holmes Road Church of Christ here in Memphis, Tennessee. We are a multicultural church for about 30 years now, and I've been thankful to minister to them. I think that what I'll try to explain to people is prejudice of any kind is a power dynamic, and it is a reach for power, that one group wants to be more powerful than another. And so in an effort to maintain power, they create a system where one group can hoard the power and protect the power and keep that power. And so then what makes the prejudice grow and what sustains it is there is an underlying hunger and a desire to maintain power, because power is like currency. You can buy things with it and purchase things with it. And so some of the things that the brothers have said before, these acts, they are even in some cases blatant displays of power that one group wants to maintain power. And so then you sort of flex. And I think that the way that Mr. Floyd's life was taken was a flex of power. And I think that once we start to realize the dynamics of racism and the system of racism, how it is a power dynamic, not just necessarily between individuals, but in a whole system, that it's understandable for one person to say, I have friends of all ethnicities, and I personally am not racist or prejudiced. But when we say racist, when we say prejudice, we are speaking about a system. And in this system, there is one group vying for power, even if it be subconsciously. It's never completely subconscious, but even when it is, at the root, it's a vying for power. And when you get power and enough of it, power sort of makes you drunk. And I think that when we see certain things in our society where people are blatant against the less powerful, and they have lost themselves, not even understanding, like, I'm being filmed, or I'm not even protecting or honoring a person's human rights. The right to do whatever I want to do. I make the rules. I decide what is and what isn't. This power dynamic, it's making us drunk. And I think that that's what's leading to some of these poor decisions. I think that as the church, if we are to be serious about making these things right, we have to first check that hunger for power. It makes us comfortable. It makes us feel better about ourselves. It makes us feel safe. But we're supposed to find the comfort and the self-esteem and safety in Jesus, which actually gives up power, especially for the smaller, more at-risk group. And so that's just where my mind has been, especially considering some of the comments made so far.
Thank you, B. I appreciate it. Jerry Mitchell, any thoughts at this point? I know you're coming at this from a different perspective as a as a Christian, but also an investigative reporter who spent your entire career seeking justice, especially in civil rights murder cases and in cases where race was a factor in what happened. Would you have any thoughts at this point of the conversation?
Well, I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be with you brothers, and appreciate your thoughts, and certainly my thoughts as well go out to the Floyd family. Thoughts and prayers for them. It's just a reminder. I mean, that God's word is wise. To me, you're supposed to treat people like you want to be treated. In fact, what Paul says in Philippians 2, that we're supposed to consider others more important than us. So you think about how society could be transformed if we would have those attitudes in general. I just say as an overview. The thing that strikes me, and of course I'm very interested in history as well, but it strikes me that we in America don't know our history because so many of these things are echoes of the past. This is not the first black male to be killed by law enforcement. And certainly what I've written about a lot is the history here in Mississippi. And I know the other day when I want to make sure, is it Arnery, if I got the name right anyway, that he was chased basically by these men with guns and obviously feared for his life, and they gunned him down. It just reminded me of like slave patrols where, basically if you're an African American and you're walking, they would stop any white man, not just the people that are quote the law, but any white man had the authority to basically pull over anyone black and be able to question them. And they had to produce a pass. You had to be able to produce a pass that showed where you were going, who, which plantation you were from and where you were going, et cetera, those kinds of things. And that incident reminded me of slave patrols. And then this one, obviously, is reminiscent of some of the things that have happened historically, unfortunately, and continue to happen. What happened in Dallas? I mean, this idea, this is my opinion. I think that there's too many law enforcement officers that had the mentality of we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, right? Yeah. So therefore, the humanity, as you've already talked about, has gotten stripped away. And there is a really good book on this. It's not a Christian book, but it's called Faces of the Enemy. And the premise of the book is, and this is very biblical, that before we kill with our weapons, we kill with our minds. And I think that's exactly true. And it's basically a collection of what started out as being World War II propaganda, but the book's been expanded since. How we dehumanize people. And the reason we dehumanize, or one of the reasons we dehumanize, is so we have permission to treat them as less than human and to destroy them either figuratively or in this case, literally. I mean, the man's cries meant nothing to him. I mean, and let that soak in. You are a officer of peace, supposed to be a peace officer, right? And yet you're bringing harm to someone. But it gets justified when the bad guy's label gets placed. This guy, they automatically assume a black kid's running in the neighborhood. Well, obviously, we need to chase him down. And, just this mentality, whether it's the citizens or whether it's the police, is very disturbing. And I think one of the main reasons, again, is that we don't know our history as Americans. We are it's like this generation, if you talk to young people, don't realize the struggle that took place for all Americans to be able to vote, to be able to have freedoms that they have, places like Mississippi, for segregation to end, the sacrifices of so many. And I'm not trying to tout my book, but I know that a lot of people who've read my book, Black and White, it said, I had no idea this happened. And that's why I think it's so valuable and so important for us to learn this history, because if we don't learn our history, we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that's what's been happening, unfortunately.
And before we go to Dr. Pointer, Jerry, could you do a real quick intro of yourself in case somebody just happened?
Sure,
to
I'm
be
sorry. Jerry Mitchell. I'm an investigative reporter here in Mississippi. I run the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, which is a nonprofit. And we do investigative reporting because newsrooms are shrinking in Mississippi and elsewhere. And we want to make sure that the facts get out, the truth is known. And politicians sometimes are not really eager to share the facts and truth. So we want to make sure those get known. And then my book is Race Against Time, which is about 4 different cases that I worked on from the civil rights movement where justice was never done. Medgar Evers' assassination, the Birmingham church bombing that killed the 4 girls, and Mississippi burning case of 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andy Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner, who were killed by the Klan, and the guy who basically orchestrated it and never been convicted. So.
And you're a member of the Skyway Hills?
I'm a member of Skyway Hills Church of Christ
in Pearl, Mississippi. Thank you, Jerry. Dr. Pointer?
Yeah, I want to, if I can, I want to go back and piggyback or flesh out, expand, unpack something that B. Chris said.
Great.
Because I think he's on he brought a good point out to really bring this discussion in terms of power. And I want to just take your mind back to he said that about race, and race is a system and systemic, and it took years to build this systemic machine, and it's going to take another systemic machine to unbreak, to dismantle the systemic system of racism, even though we know there's only one race, that's a human race. But if you look on your application, everything's all about race. First thing they ask you, what race are you? Because we make everything about race. The other thing I want to go back to the in your mind, and almost you've seen it, go back to the picture where he was getting his life taken out of him. Remember how that George Floyd, as he was there on the ground, notice how I believe it was the Asian child that stood guard, if you will, to make sure that nobody interrupts what was going on here. So even though we have a black man, we see white supremacy in action. We have a black man on the ground, his life is being taken away. That's the power I'm talking about. That's that power. We got power. Your life has no value. You're a black man. And here's the thing that really gets you. He went to, for understanding, he went to a store and they said that it was a counterfeit $20 bill. I'm sorry, that doesn't justify a death sentence. You already had him in handcuffs. So they dehumanized him. And then he had no due process. He should have been booked, put in a car, taken down, and had due process like everybody else. Because, okay, so you could label him as a bad person. You labeled him, you saw him, he's black. You saw no value. Until we see each other as equal, we'll never solve this race problem. We'll never be able to make headway, because as long as you see white supremacy, white privilege, we're going to always have the same issue. Minneapolis has it because, as you know, we have 85% white population. We were blessed to have a black attorney general, first time for executive state. We have a black police chief who's doing a phenomenal job. But we have 80% white. And I think that I want to give a solution, because I think sometimes we always talk about the problem. We never think about a solution. I think one of the things, just an idea, just a notion, ideology that might help. I think that we need to do a better job. I think what David Duke said years ago, that he allowed the KKK went into the police force in different areas. And as long as you have police officers that are ex-KKK, as long as we continue we have to do a better job vetting. We have to vet our officers better. I watched our police chief say how much money he spent on training them. Well, if you're already a white supremacist, I can go to all training I want to in the world. It's not going to do anything good. So what we have to do is before you become a police officer, there has to be special vetting, training, enabling, equipping to protect and serve all of humanity, not just who you want. So until we do a better job at vetting, and I think when I say that, it needs to go through the FBI, it needs to go to the Homeland, it needs to do more than just a hometown good old boy. Oh, I know your daddy. Come on, you police officer. It has to be a background check, credit check, a lie detector test, everything to make sure that we're getting the best of the best. And let me just say this. I want to say this on record. All cops are not bad. But what I saw that day was the blue shield. It's like us against them. A blue shield protecting our own. And we have the right to do this because we're police officers. And I want to go home at the end of the day. Well, all of us want to go home at the end of the day. And now I don't know what to tell my boys. I don't know what to tell my church. I used to tell them, just put your hand on the steering wheel, put your hands up. You still get shot. Don't say nothing, you still get shot. Tell it, you talk, you still get shot. You get out the car, you still get shot. So I don't know what to tell anybody because it's hard to tell them. So I try to tell my boys and my men that, look, try to live to see another day. We could fight it if you live. Just live. Whatever it takes, just live. Just try to. So it is sad that I have to have a conversation with my boys on what to do when you get pulled over. I was talking to some of my white colleague preachers, and they laughed when I told them I have to have lessons of telling my boys what to do when they get pulled over. I get pulled over still. Just to give you one incident, but I was driving in Minneapolis and during rush hour, and I was coming back from a funeral and had my car loaded. I was driving an SUV, and I got in the fast lane and I just kind of accelerated, and all of a sudden the cop comes out and saw me. So I was driving and pulled me over, talking about doing 80 miles an hour. And that was rush hour. Gave me a ticket for 80 miles an hour in the middle of rush hour. But I'm just trying to show you that it doesn't matter who you are, what kind of car you drive. It doesn't matter as long as I'm driving and I'm black, then I'm a suspect. And I think we have to get that ideology out of that notion, that thinking that I don't like walking around every time I look around, I'm a suspect. When I walk in the store, you want to follow me around. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing. We got to understand that we got to get that notion out of our mind. And I think we have to give people due process. And I think we have to do a better job at vetting our police officers. And I think that's a good way to start. And like he said, power. Just like, I don't make this comparison, but it's kind of like when President Obama became president, it's like the country made a vow not to have another black man with power ever. And so it's like, and I hate to say that, but it is. That's the truth. I mean, we can't deny what Shakespeare said in Hamlet, to thine own self. But we ain't even honest with ourselves. So we have to be honest that for some reason there's and black man, they fear the black man, and the black man is angry. And we got to do a better job at that.
Can I ask a question? I'm Emil Harris. C. Russell went back 30 years in Tallahassee, and I'm helped Bobby at the Christian Chronicle. I'm still in DC, the Washington Post and other things. But, we've seen this over and over again. I'm in Baltimore, Freddie Gray and things like that. But the question seems like we as African Americans often talk about this situation, but I don't see that partnership with the white brethren in terms of working together as a team to try to work with the hearts of people. You talk about the vetting. Is it time for the church to be vetted in terms of people who have a sincere mind to help the least of these? I mean, can you all talk about what can be done going forward? What are you thinking about doing going forward?
Well, I'll speak to that just briefly. I know one of the things that we've been doing here in the Dallas DFW area is meeting with the white ministers. When I was contacted by Bobby, I thought about someone, and I said, hey, it'd be great to have him on this call because of the work that we've been doing here, and I think it's going to take white people, if I can say it that way, being honest with themselves that we really and truly have a problem, as long as the ministers that come to our meetings, their membership gives them grief if they get in the pulpit and preach on these issues. You know, they may have to pack their bags, you know, if they get up and talk about race and deal with race. So it's a true challenge for them. But we've got to sit down and have some very honest conversations in order to deal with it. And I also, I mentioned earlier, you know, I'm just going to change the subject just briefly here, but I'm reminded of what I heard the head of the police union in Minneapolis say: "Don't rush to judgment." Well, you know, again, there's a culture in our police departments where they protect their own, and until that culture is changed, you know, we're going to continue to have this problem. So I'll stop there.
Can I say something, Brother Ross?
Sure.
Okay, I want to add on to what Brother Barry said, and I'm glad that B. Chris Simpson is on the phone because he can attest to this. One of the things I've done, and I don't say I like alone, but myself, we're the only Black church in the whole state of Minnesota.
Wow, I did not realize that.
Christ, yeah. So we partnership with Woodbury, Richfield, and one or two other churches, and we have a program every year. And B. Chris was one of our speakers that we called in to be a part of it, so he can attest that we have something like this. We get together every year and we discuss race issues and how we could do better. And he came one year and spoke on it, and then we speak about it on Friday night, Saturday all day, different lectures on it, and then Sunday we go to Woodbury, and then on Sunday they come over to Minneapolis Central, and we usually have a forum. I have experts come in and talk about that. But this year we did something very different, and let me tell you something. It hurts because there's a lot of pain involved. There's a lot of you're talking about different things. So B. Chris could tell you that, but it's a good forum. Everybody's really with try. One thing that you learn about it is I know that we're angry, but we can't be angry when we're discussing it. We have to be able to discuss it in an intellectual manner. So you asked, he had asked what we do for the church. So what we did this year is I had him come over and I had a whole panel with nothing but millennials. I let millennials talk about racism. And when I tell you that I saw an elder from one of the congregations cry, he cried because he didn't realize how much the kids knew and saw, and how much they don't care about the race, and how they saw them act. You know what I'm saying? It just touched their heart. So I want to give my hats out to Brother Jordan Tatum and Patrick Dottery and myself and all of those and the elders at Woodbury, because they actually fund it. But I want to thank Jordan Tatum for seeing it. My vision helped me to bring that into reality. So yes, we are doing programs to bring us together because I think we're better together. And I think the only way we're going to become healthy is to discuss it. It can no longer be the elephant in the room. We can no longer sweep it under the carpet. Let's talk about it. If you're a white supremacist, let's talk about it. Why are you a white supremacist? You know what I'm saying? That's how we talk. We address it head on. So I'm glad B. Chris is on this phone because he's a witness to tell you that, Brother Harris, that we do this every year. We probably do more of it, but we do it every year. I think it's November, was it? October, November. We do it right around time every year. And Woodbury Church of Christ there in Minnesota, they have it in their budget. And we have it every single. It's been awesome. And it's been a blessing. We've had a few kickbacks, but it's been a blessing overall. And I want to say that we are trying to work together with both our cultures. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Pointer, if you think to let me know about that before you do it next time, I would love to.
Yeah.
If we ever get in a position where we're traveling again, that might be a great story for the Chronicle at some point.
Yeah, I actually have a follow-up question for Dr. Pointer. How many years did you say you've been doing this?
But why are you bothering me? Oh, I'm just joking.
Hey, introduce yourself too, since you're new, since you're just doing the call.
All right, I'm John Edwardson. I'm the minister and one of the elders at the Vineyard Congregation in the beautiful city of Phoenix, home of the best professional basketball and football team in the country. But anyway, as I was saying, how many years have you been doing your event, Doc?
Okay, so I think we did it. This will be our 5th year, 4th year. Chris, when did you come? 3 years ago?
I think it was about 4 years ago.
Okay, so this is our 4th year. This will be our 4th year doing it. So this is about 5th year actually. So and it's really good. It's been very. And I talked about it because one of the how we got started was, and that's a good question. We got started because when I got to Minnesota, I didn't know anybody. I don't because I moved. Who's in Minnesota, right? But I moved to Minnesota and I didn't know anybody. And then we were out from Tennessee. We always got together and had gatherings, so we all knew each other. And one thing that bothered me is I could be in a store and a member of the church could be in the store with me and I would never know you're a member of the church. So I said, well, let's try to get together at least once a year to at least see who we are. So we have a Thanksgiving service and then we have this program. So at least we would know different members of the Church of Christ. We can fellowship and build relationships. And I said, we got to do something. Because when I first got here, I sent flyers out. They didn't come. They sent me flyers. I didn't go. So we're like, we're church. We're one body. We're all members. Why can't we fellowship? So I gave this big spiel, and I don't know if they fell out with me or not, but they finally came. It took a couple of years for them to get in, to inundate their mind and hearts. And then after a while, they started. Then they started wanting to be a part of it, and we started visiting each other. So it wasn't something that was done. This was something I had to do 5 years praying, and we meet every month. Every time I got to a preacher's meeting, I'd bring it up. I talk about we need to get together. We need to get together. So it took us about 5 years to actually, after articulating it, envisioning it, to actually bring it into fruition. It took about 5 years. But once we did it, everybody likes it now. You know how it is. You bring the idea up, but everybody grabs it now. So now every Thanksgiving we have a packed house, and the race forum it started off real big. It's dying down just a little bit, but only because it hurts. People don't want to hear the truth all the time. So we still gonna have it, I think, and so we still doing well with it. But thank you. We have it 45 years now, and we're strong with it.
Yeah, is your goal to create like a working group to make some of what you're hearing and speaking put into more of a practical kind of format versus our just getting together and just kind of dialoguing about things? I'm curious if we were to introduce some type of template like that here, do you see anything concrete coming out of it outside of the fact that we can say that we've discussed these issues?
Good question. I'd put it this way. I also went on I also went on a Sankofa trip, but we do it every year. We send like 30 preachers down, half black, half white. We spend a whole week together, joined to the hip. And when I tell you that I believe that it's real until, again, it goes back to my statement. I don't think you're on the call yet. Until you see me as your equal, we'll never be where we ought to be. And so I say that because this is to start. Like right now, because of that would be, Chris, the relationship I have with the elders at Woodbury and other churches, we eat each other's houses. Some of them have been to my house. I've cooked dinner. Until you're able to fellowship with me and see me as an equal, we'll never make any progress. So I say yes because, do I eat all of them? No. But I mean, through the relationships, even during this discourse, I've had, I didn't count my phone, but I probably had about 25 white preachers, not just Church of Christ, call me and make sure I was okay and if I needed anything, and they're right here in the city. So I'm showing you that works because I go to their house to eat with their wives and their children, and they come to my house. So I think because we have that kind of relationship, I think that's the only way it's going to progress forward. Now, do I have that relationship with everybody? No, but it's a start. I believe it's a start. We got to start. What you need to start doing is, find white couples, white people that you could go and just, hey, I want a relationship with you. You know what I'm saying? We're going to build this relationship and show people what it looks like to be together in Christ, not just in the same space, but actually at the same mind. And when we could do that consciously, and you could go out and break bread with me, and I can come and you invite me to your house and treat me like I'm your neighbor and your friend. Now we're making progress. And we're doing that with some of the people here in Minnesota.
Could I ask one more question?
Sure.
I like what you said about breaking bread with people. I know I went to meet Bobby's parents and stuff, and we're very different, but we are Christians together for Brother Evans' funeral. But my question is, in terms of focus, do you feel that that's even Bobby way on this? Do you feel that to have this breaking bread moment, because to me, and maybe the reporter from the investigative reporter, because I talked to a reporter from Ole Miss during accreditation time for the school, and I said, why is it so hard? And real bluntly, he says that whites are still mad about President Obama and that his election, and they can't get beyond that. And so is it at that level that we need to have dialogue, or is that just, how do we deal with the reality of what our separate and unequal worlds that we deal with?
Well, you're right. It is a reality, but we got to start somewhere is what I'm saying. Just like what you and Brother Ross are doing. You have to start somewhere, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, can I just be real just for 1 second? Y'all can, y'all can not like me. That's okay. But I got to speak the truth. The truth is the fact, at the end of the day, when you could say you're tired of the current president, we don't like him, whatever. I'm not deciding what side you're on, Democrat. I'm just saying, speaking in general, you may not like it, but at the end of the day, when they go in that booth and have to pull between this man and that man, they're going to go with their Republican. They're going to go with the man that they like, a white person. And they could like you and know you from a child and know you good and know your grandparents, your big mama and Pookie and Ray Ray, all of them. And at the end of the day, you're still going to go in and do what they have to do. So I'm saying we got to break that with what Chris is saying, that systemic racism power, that white supremacy. It has to be dealt with. And the only way we got to talk about it now, now I'm going to say this, and I hate to say this, some folk gonna have to die before it gets better. So I just want to say that to you, because you're right. It can, but we have to start somewhere, Harris. We have to start. That's all I'm saying. Let us begin with me. You make the difference. At least I want to know that I tried to make a difference, even if just one man. If I can be good friends with Brother Ross and we make a difference, if I could get Brother Jerry Mitchell and we make a difference, I felt like if I go tomorrow, I've made a contribution because I tried to make life better. If that makes sense. We got to start.
Can I ask, I guess, a general question about, obviously, we've got, if I can count, 6 black ministers on this call, and then Jerry and me, who are obviously white.
I didn't know.
What is it that white people, white Christians, how should we respond to what has happened in Minneapolis? I mean, is denouncing racism what we should do? I mean, is it?
Well, Bobby, I'm sorry to cut you off. What I would say is this, and I'll be very, very brief. I think when we see these types of things happen, we tend to have some type of a reaction. But what we really need, and this is a point originally with me. It's in David Nowin's book, Reaching Out. We need a loving response, because you see the problem. Another problem that we have in America is, until and I saw it in Minneapolis, they were looting and tearing down things, and we feel like, or the message that has been sent to us, until you go and tear up stuff, we're not going to respond in any way to what's going on. There is no problem. In Brunswick, Georgia, it was covered up for 2 months. Nothing done until the video comes out. Well, we got to stop reacting and start responding. Know exactly what we're going to do anytime we see injustice, and speak out against it. Call a spade, so to speak. So I'll just stop there.
So I've seen white ministers on Facebook post statuses along the lines of, "This isn't political. This is racism, and we as Christians need to call this out for what it is." Is what you're saying? Is that the right response?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But the other thing, I'm going to go back to a point that I made earlier. When I talk to the ministers here in Dallas, when they do that, they get a lot of pushback from the people in the pews. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the pews.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think that church leaders can be very influential in creating expanded safe space. that reaches beyond our typical mental constructs. When you sit down and take the time, as Rick actually did, and I'm not a huge fan of Rick actually in all areas of his ministry, but it was very apparent that he sat down, took the time, and made the calculated risk of making a statement. And what that does is that creates safe space for people who are like-minded, who are in his views, to join him. It also creates space for people from different ethnic backgrounds to join him. But a lack of action, a lack of posting, a lack of speaking on the matter portrays either a level of disengagement or a lack of not caring. I mean, how can this happen and you not say something? When you say something about the Lakers and the Bulls and Roll Tide and everything else, you've got something to say. But when it comes to this man's life being taken, I mean, it's like all you hear is crickets. So then I think subconsciously, the rest of us kind of have a sneaking suspicion that though at times, you sit at the table with Dr. Pointer, you sit at the table with myself and others, are you really at the table? Because if you were really at the table, there's a certain way that you're going to behave and that you're going to conduct yourself. And when we see you step out there, you allow others to join you and we create a choir against this kind of ludicrous behavior. And I'm talking about something simple that every minister and every elder can do. I'm not saying that you got to, join some big crusade, but when you affirm that this is wrong, we need to try to do something, and you put together, some way where your people can say that you're being affected by this, that I think is exampleship at its finest.
I also want to say that to answer your question, I think it's going to take, Ross, because that's a very powerful point you made. It's going to take, and excuse the term, it's going to take a white man talking to white man to correct it. It's not, if I say something, it will not carry the same weight. But if you see it, the one reason why it's even getting, okay, so if you remember at first, they just wanted to put them on administrative leave. But what happened was because of the outrage of so many white people in this city that saw that do have some morals and some character about themselves, they had nothing but they had to react. Because why? Because the white man, if I could say that, the white man is outraged now. They even couldn't even believe that they saw that. So I'm just saying, to answer your question, Ross, I think that if I could be straight out, it's going to take a white man to correct another white man to make it right. It's got to take you got to talk to each other. If I say it, oh, that's just Pointer, oh, he's black, or he's mad, or he's angry, he's thinks he's all that, he thinks he knows something. No. If you say it, it carries more weight. So I think a white man say to another white man.
Two equals, in other words.
Yeah. Let me just say, Doc, be nice, Barry. I was trying to be nice. I just figured out who you were. Good to see you, Doc. I just realized who you were. Sorry about that.
Russell, but let me ask you something, Bobby, too. We know about getting the white brethren to acknowledge this pain, but then in terms of our own communities, and unfortunately in the DC area, I've been at the Watch for 25 years, and the black press too, and we don't see us on those demonstrations with Freddie Gray. I had to stop being a journalist to be the preacher to do his middle service in the cemetery because there was no other preachers there. And then they said, what you doing over there with them? Sometimes we still struggle as black ministers, I'm a minister too, to not fellowship with people who are not, quote, COC. And this coalition, look at Keeble, Dr. King, look at Fred Gray, you had a few. And Keeble, that whole thing. How do we deal with being part of a coalition? And then also when the good brothers say, you've been yoked with unbelievers. There you go down there with them folks and don't have God forbid they're gay, whatever. So what do we do to empower our community and still keep our theological, and don't get kicked out by the elders or whatever?
Well, I'm going to respond to that just again, just quickly, and I'm going to refer back to Henry Nouwen in his book. I called his name wrong earlier. He talked about a concept of receptivity and confrontation. In other words, I accept you as you are. You know, you are who you are. I accept you, but I will only also go so far with you. Okay. So there in other words, let me say it this way. If you are a smoker, you can come into my house. Okay. But if you want to light one up, I'm going to send you to the street out there. So the other thing I'll say about this, that is when you go out to the community and start working in the community, there is everything and everybody out there. They're Baptists, they're Methodists, they're Episcopals, they're Catholics, and those are the people in the community. This is not just a Church of Christ problem, and we cannot solve it. We cannot solve it only in the Church of Christ.
Can I add to the fact that I really think that one of the things we have to be mindful of on a couple of these issues that I've been listening to for the last few minutes is that a lot of this is deeply rooted spiritual problem. And for those of us as believers, both black and white, or whatever you are, it goes back to being connected to the heart of God. And that's where I think a lot of our disconnect has come. That's why we don't see the needed, the very, very necessary outrage. And again, it doesn't have to be out of control or rioting or anything like that, but from our white brethren, we need that outrage. We need you all to be just as upset about it as we are. And again, it can't be a manufactured thing. It can't be something that you're just pretending to do. But and I think the lack of that is being disconnected from the heart of God. When we look at a book like Amos, for example, the prophet Amos, he literally shows us that the heart of God screams. It literally, I mean, the very first chapter, he says the Lord roars from Zion. You know, that's a powerful image of God's heart and his outrage and his reaction to the cruelty and the injustice and the oppression that the book of Amos goes on to detail. And I think when we, as Christians, as members and as leaders, we become at ease in Zion, comfortable in our buildings, comfortable with the financial security that we have, comfortable with the relationships that we have, comfortable with our little pocket of the culture, and we become at ease in Zion, we lose connection with the heart of God, and we stop screaming at the stuff God screams at. And that's a problem. We're not screaming when God is screaming. So it's a spiritual disconnect that we're not passionate about the things that he's passionate about. And it goes back to that comfort. And so I think that we need the outrage. We need the spiritual scream for justice from everybody. And then I think to the point that Brother Harris made about us being reluctant to really get involved in a lot of the activism and the protests and seeing that's an issue. And we face it in the white church, the black church. It's an issue because even with the work that we were doing around the water crisis here in Flint, when I would talk about going to a protest or going down to City Hall or going here to do this and that and to make our voices heard, there's a lot of reluctance from members of the church to get involved in that kind of thing. And we've gotten to the place where we've cultured ourselves to, well, that's not really a spiritual thing, but it is, because it goes right to the heart of God. Or we'll say things like, well, we don't really know who's organizing. And I got a lot of that. I don't know who's going to be there and who's going to be involved. And well, they're organizing it, so we can't really be involved in that. And my response always was, look, I'm going I'll be there. Your preacher, your minister is going to be there. There might be some folks that we don't necessarily agree with theologically and politically and all that, but at some point you've got to step out of your comfort zone and take a stand for what's right. And when you do that, you might find yourself standing with some people that you don't necessarily agree with, and always point us back to Jesus. Listen, his ministry took him, and his heart took him in the company of some people that he might not have agreed with, and some unsavory characters, as some others would look at. And we have to be willing to do the same for what's right and for what's just and for those things that God's heart screams against. We got to be willing to put ourselves in some uncomfortable places to do what's right. And I think the church has to have our culture change and our mind change on some of those things.
How can you?
Can I interrupt real quick? We're coming up on just a couple of minutes left of the hour that I requested for you. I've got plenty of time, but I know Brother Barry is needing to leave. So anybody, if you need to leave and we go too long, we appreciate all of you showing up. But I don't want to end this right now. I'm just letting you know that I know Brother Barry has to leave, and if anybody else has to leave at some point, I totally understand that and really appreciate all of you.
Yeah, no problem. I was going to say quickly that, if we're using God as a model for thinking about certain things, it's just tough for us to be so contained so often. I think that we need to be allowed to sit in our emotion and to stand in our truth and to reflect anger and frustration and disappointment along the lines of some of these issues. And I think our fear of allowing people to really express what's going on in their heart is part of what's driving the rioting in Minneapolis, even at this time. I know when Rodney King's thing hit in LA, I was up in my office, and on that day, the first thing that you started smelling was smoke. Well, I, went around the whole church. It's like, man, is the church on fire? Well, no, the church wasn't on fire. LA was on fire. And there was such a visceral reaction, and it touched people so deep. And I think in the first few days of the affair, we could have gotten on top of it if we were more action-oriented around listening, empathy, and allowing people to talk and to cry and to be upset. And in those moments, steering the conversation toward our being more constructive about ways we can respond to this. Burning up your neighborhood is not the way to go, but I understand that, and I'm mad too. So if I'm mad too, let's be mad together. Okay, how can we channel this anger and this frustration into some type of vehicle that has a greater outcome than just a few items being destroyed that will probably get repaired within a couple of weeks, and we'll be right back to square one. So if I think people could feel that there is more of a brotherhood with some of this, and we're more aligned and we think alike regarding some of these things, and let's sit down and let's figure out some strategies of how we can take this unbridled anger and do something with it constructively. Right now, I just think it's a crisis of just like Los Angeles in some ways. And of course, this is a generalization, so I'm sure there are many out in front. But at a national level, the voices were really, really quiet, which is why that whole Rodney King thing lasted for such a long time. And I'm hopeful now that we'll get some men and women out front who are more secure in themselves and more willing to step down, into the trench, to step down into the motion and say, hey, what are we going to do about this that's greater than us tearing up this man's businesses who may or may not have anything to do with what happened with Mr. Floyd.
Bobby, I'd like to add something.
Sure.
Especially considering what Brother Edmondson just said. I think that there are a number of things that what Black people can do and what white people can do. In reference to Black people, I appreciate Brother Edmondson bringing out the anger part. I am angry. I am hurt. I am scared. For instance, I knew Botham Jean. I was raised in the Black church my whole life. Growing up, I did not even know white people outside of the teachers I had at school and the people with whom my father owned his business. When I went to Harding, that was my first time being submerged in the white culture. And my life and Botham's life, as he went to Harding too, was so similar. When I went to his funeral, I felt like I had to check to make sure I wasn't dead. It was a traumatic experience because it was as if I were killed, this is what it would be like looking and sitting in Botham's funeral. We should be angry because we should like what God likes and hate what he hates. But I think as the church, what we need to do is give Black people a forum in the church to be angry. Over 40% of the Psalms are called lament Psalms, which are designed for the prayer to be angry with God, to be upset, and to lay it bare before the Lord. We are not good at that in our churches. So I think what our Black churches need to do is open up forums and teaching where we can be angry, we can be scared. I think another thing that we as Black people need to do is to be brave enough to be humble. It's very difficult to be this angry and then turn right around and be humble enough to help white people learn what they need to learn. Granted, white people should already be learning on their own, and I'm going to get to that, but I think that it takes a certain amount of bravery to be humble enough to be this angry, this scared, this put out. My son is a Black boy. I am a 33-year-old Black man. My brother is Black. So it's hard to be that angry and then turn right around and be humble enough to teach, to not fly off the handle, and to not burn down the neighborhood. So I think it's the church that should counsel us, that should love us and teach us that God is big enough to handle your anger because he's angry too. I think a third thing Black people should do is we should look at our ministers. Brother Barry has stepped off the line, but when I saw Brother Barry on the news carrying that casket in downtown Dallas in that protest, I have known Brother Barry. I grew up in Dallas, Texas at the Marsalis Avenue Church. I've known Brother Barry since I was a boy, but to see him do that taught me what to do. We understand that there are a lot of different ideologies and theologies that may prevent some of our churches from being involved with other types of churches during these protests. But the reality is this: we are looking to brothers. We are looking to ministers. I was very encouraged by Dr. Pointer, what he did whenever he got those churches together and the part that he played up in Minneapolis. That teaches me, because I've only been in ministry for about 12 years, it teaches me what I need to do. And we are looking at ministers. And so then to answer Hamil's question, Mr. Harris, I want to say, we are looking at our ministers. One minister in the Black community can topple the whole thing. One minister in the Black community can reteach a generation. And so as Black ministers, we need to be reteaching the young ministers and the church. So I think that as Black people, what we have to do is find spiritual ways to be angry and spiritual ways to get that anger off of our chest before the Lord. The second thing we need to do is be brave enough to be humble in spite of the anger, the hurt, and the fear. Humble enough to still help. Humble enough to still give. And then I think that we need to look to our ministers, myself included, on what we do to lead people to be more on the front lines, to be in the marches, to do the demonstrations. In reference to white people, and I'm answering the question about solution. I think in reference to my white brothers and sisters, we have to search our hearts. The thing that brought me into Dr. Pointer's area up in Minneapolis to do this racial reconciliation thing that they do every year, which is very impactful, is because of my own experience working at a multicultural church. I've learned that white people have to search their hearts. The addiction to power is at the root of all prejudice. And I think that white people believe that they can treat and see Black people equally while still maintaining their power structure and maintaining their level of power. But this is an impossibility. In order to be equal with someone else, it is a necessity to give up some of your power. You cannot simultaneously be equal to the person and maintain your same amount of power. You have to give it up. And so we have to search ourselves. White people, especially my white brothers and sisters, they have to search themselves to make certain that they are willing to do that. After that, white people, they need to educate themselves and educate other people who are close to them, their families, their children, their sons, their daughters. After they do that, I think that white people need to consider these types of things when voting. I understand that when we vote, we are taught to worry about our needs, and that's not all bad. But Jesus, when Paul spoke about the work he did in Philippians 2, he says, you are not to just worry about your own needs, but also for the needs of others. And so I think it's a countercultural way of talking about voting, when you worry not only about your needs, but also about needs of other people. So we should consider these things when looking at candidates on the federal, the state, and the local level. What happens when we vote if a thing like this happened in your local area? Are you confident that the people you've put in office are going to see this situation like you do? And so I think that we need to take that into consideration. I think that considering that Black people are being hit with stones every day, if white people are to stand with us, you ought to be getting hit by stones too. If our white brothers and sisters are saying that we stand with Black people, but you are not getting hit by the same rocks we are, at least one or two off the cuff, it's important that you stand closer. And so what I feel like that means is you have to start these conversations in your church. You have to be willing to ruffle feathers. You have to be willing to get called to the carpet by your elders. You have to be willing to post that on social media. You have to be willing to be anathema and outcast. You have to be willing to do all these things. You've got to talk about it at your job. It's important that white people be like Jesus. We all have to wake up. Because as a Black man, whenever I still choose to love white people through my guilt, a lot of my, and I'm 33, so I am a millennial. A lot of my Black millennials be like, miss me with that white man's religion, bro.
Correct.
He is. I still choose through the anger, through the fear, to love because I know that that's what God wants, not because I'm somebody or even because it's easy, but I do it for that reason. And people reject me from my own community. And so it's only right that if white people are to stand for what's right, that people from your own community will reject you too. You have to give up the power. You cannot keep it. And so I think that these are some sort of concrete things that both Black people and white people can do in the face of these things. Because ultimately, at the church I've been at for 8 years, we were a 500-member church. Over 20 years, we went down to 160. Now we've been rebuilding. In the last 8 years, we've been privileged to grow. This is what I've seen about the white people at my church. With great sacrifice, they were able to build a multicultural church. They stayed in a Black neighborhood, and they built a multicultural church. Their friend said, "You still at Holmes Road, that old Black church?" And so I've seen the level of sacrifice they have to make. And I think that when working with Dr. Pointer up in Minneapolis, those white churches, they came eager to be small. That in order for Jesus and God's will to increase, we have to decrease. And I think that's going to be the case. So that's just what I wanted to weigh in on some solutions to the problem.
Okay. Yes,
Oh,
Jerry.
I'm gonna have to run, but I did want to say to everyone what an honor it has been to be on the call with you, and just want to let you know I'm happy to come to any of your churches, and if there's an event or whatever you want, I'm happy to come speak. I speak regularly and talk regularly about God and justice, so I'm happy to come and talk about that. because God loves justice, as you well know.
Jerry, would you have just a minute or two to say what you think justice might look like in this case in Minneapolis?
Hang on a second. What's that?
I was going to ask real quick before you have to go,
Sure.
in your mind, what justice might look like in Minneapolis as far as...
That's a good question. I mean, I think that, you know, they did take the first step in firing these guys, and they need to look at it. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, I think it's a hard guess for me in terms of which statute to prosecute them, but they need to be prosecuted criminally. I mean, that's a pretty obvious statement. And then whatever you feel like, you know, I mean, obviously your heart cries out that, you know, you stole a man's life. I mean, you did. You stole a man's life, and unnecessarily, because whatever the reason, you know, you didn't consider him human. Let's just be honest. You didn't consider him human. I mean, what if that had been your daughter? You know what I mean? Would you have put your knee on her neck and not let her get up and breathe? I mean, I think that's the problem, is that whites unconsciously, I'm speaking of myself too. I mean, I think whites unconsciously don't think about, quote unquote, don't think about race at the same time they do, if that makes any sense. Or we claim not to think about race, but yet we are in the way that we act. And so I think that's why it's important to, like I said, I think that's why the history is important, because we don't know our history. This doesn't get taught in schools. And it's one of the reasons I do that every day and Bobby, you know about it, on Facebook. I put it out every day, kind of this day in history. Because inevitably I have people come up and they, you know, respond to it and say, I never knew this. It's, we don't know our history. We don't know that the KKK infiltrated law enforcement throughout Mississippi. You know, I mean, that was just part of the way they operated and things like that. And so anyway, I just want to let justice is about, you know, the first thing you want in order to have justice is to have the truth. So we need the truth. We need the truth, a full amount of truth in that, although it's pretty darn obvious from the video what happened. I mean, multiple videos of what happened. So it's not so much of a mystery in this case, but we need the truth, and through the truth, and it may be systematic. You're able to look at, let's say I was a reporter up there, that would be one of the things I would look at. This guy apparently had a history of mistreating people over time. And the thing they ought to look at is, how was this guy punished in the past, if at all? And if he wasn't punished, why not? And if he wasn't punished, then you can almost bet there are others who weren't punished, and so therefore it's a part of the culture. So those are the things that I think need to be looked at beyond just this particular case, if that makes any sense, but look at it systemically as well. If this guy really had carried out these things repeatedly over time, why wasn't anything done about it? Why was he allowed to continue to be in that capacity? So those are things I think need to be looked at in determining justice.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I think that's one reason why our police chief called in FBI.
Absolutely. Need to.
You know, there's got to be accountability. You can't discipline yourself.
You can't investigate yourself. You need to have the FBI come in and look at, and hopefully FBI will look deeper than just this particular case.
So I do want to wrap my part up. I got to run as well in a little bit. Okay. I got a little bit of time, but I want to say this. I want to give my solutions, and then I'll make that on record. Number one, I want to go back to what Emerson and what Chris and Rigo was saying, that I think that we're going to have to me, when I look at history, it's problematic for me. It disturbs me that a lot of racism comes out of Christendom. That bothers me. How can you say you know God and yet you're going to treat people like this? but it goes back to power and understand. And they tell me that power is the last thing that a man wants to give up. And so that's another, if you look at old age, when you get 60, 70, that's why preachers stay in the pulpit till they get 90, because the power is the last thing they want to give up. You ever seen grandparents, they don't want to leave their house. They'll stay there and almost put the house on fire because power is the last thing they want to give up. When I look at this thing, I think we could do something. The reason why I like the model of Minneapolis where I am is because all I'm trying to say is we got to do something. And we can, it's like people saying, the black church saying, well, we don't have elders because not qualify. Well, what are you doing to qualify them? When are you going to start, when you're going to realize that people ain't Jesus, but they got, you got to find somebody that has the heart of God that can take care of the people of God. And what I noticed about, for example, the civil rights and Black Lives Matters is when I look back into history, civil rights, if you go back and look at it, the reason why King was successful at the very end, whites finally got on his side, and he was strategic. Everything he did, he told them they went to classes, the church buildings, and learned how to take the dogs, how to take water resistance, what to do when they put you out. This wasn't done haphazardly or spontaneously. He had guys that trained them how to take water hoses and how to and come back when you get put out of a restaurant, how to go back. How to, so it was strategic. And the thing that I noticed about, it was organized, in other words, it was organization. When I noticed about Black Lives Matter, they came along, and I think that if they had took the same lesson the civil rights did and done a good job, or a better job, should I say, in my opinion, organization and structure, I think that Black Lives Matter could have made a more impact even in this day, like the civil rights did back in its day. So again, my suggestion is, do a better job vetting our police officers before they become police officers. And then secondly, I would like to suggest, I think that there needs to be some kind of policy law made up, and I hate to say it, but that's what I'm gonna do it, where we're not suspect and we're not a target. That there's extra punishment if you do something to a Black, colored, unarmed. Now, notice why I said unarmed, when he's not an unthreatening matter, because they need to do something that automatically doesn't cover the police officer. Because a lot of times we hide behind a shield and all that kind of stuff. We can't do that no more. And lastly, I want to say to the preachers that are in the audience, that are on the screen, I think I'm older than most of you guys, continue to keep building, continue to keep dealing with racial issues. Be a bridge builder. One of my policies is I'm a bridge builder. No matter what, I'm not trying to build walls. I'm trying to build bridges. And as I build bridges, I have to be willing to be driven over and walked on to make progress. Love y'all. There's nothing you can do about it. Thank you for the time. And I hope
Thank you so much for being with us.
I'll be glad to help you. Amen.
Thank you. Well, before we wrap this up, anybody else have any thoughts or things you want to say, or important questions that we didn't ask or get to that we should have?
I want to say that I'm very happy that you're taking more of a, I guess, position more quickly. You feel like you know people and you know things, and I guess for me, it had gotten so bad where my expectations were so low for our fellowship that I've just grown to not expect, a lot of outcry. So to see that, Bobby, you're willing to put this out there and to write about it, I think speaks to your leadership and your desire to be more relevant in this era. And I think that's a great thing. So my hat's off to you. I appreciate being invited with such an esteemed group of panelists. I gotta going into the hospital today and do some chaplaincy work. But you guys take care. Thanks for the invite. And hopefully we can do this again one day.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, thank you, everybody. We will connect again soon, I hope. So thank you very much, and we'll see you out there sometime soon, hopefully.